Hey everybody, it's Dennis Volpe. Super excited to talk to everybody tonight. And the reason Dave's video is not working is because he actually doesn't have power. So he's out of power, and he's on a mobile a hotspot right now. So that's why he's got audio only. So yeah, he was nice enough to ask me to cover the disc portion of things as well. So. The intent tonight is to talk a little bit about emotional intelligence, a little bit about the DISC model of human behavior, and then talk about the project that Dave and I are working on and see where that's going to go. So, without further ado, why are we going to talk about emotional intelligence? Well, why? Because it actually impacts every aspect of our life, whether it's personal or professional. When you look at emotional intelligence, it's about self-awareness. It's about self-management. It's about interpersonal relationships. It's about how we manage stress. And it's about how we make decisions. So if you think about those 5 things, it absolutely impacts every aspect of our life. And the Center for Creative Leadership, based on all of the work that they've done, they've determined how they did it, don't know, but 50 to 75% of leadership effectiveness is determined by a leader's emotional intelligence. And just this year, in February, the World Economic Forum came out with the single most critical factor that separates top performers is high emotional intelligence. So what are we going to do? I'm going to talk about a model, and there's plenty of assessments out there, but this happens to be one of them. And how has my understanding of emotional intelligence been informed? Well, part of it's personal experience. Part of it is professional experience. Part of it is getting an advanced degree in leadership development. Part of it is actually getting certified in emotional intelligence, and then getting certified as a coach. But I would say the biggest is my coaching experience, because since I retired a couple of years ago, I've coached several hundred folks that are on the high potential track. They're emerging leaders and transitioning military veterans. So that's where the body of knowledge is really coming from. And when we think about what is emotional intelligence, and can everybody see that? This is the EQI 2.0 model, right? And emotional intelligence, to break it down, it's our ability to use emotional information in an effective way. How do we understand ourselves? How do we express ourselves? And how do we make decisions? And all of that is about how we maintain our social relationships and cope with the challenges that life gives us. So when we think about it, what is it really? And because you've got lots of terms here, you've got 5 subscales, and you got 3 sub-subscales to those subscales. So how do you break it down into a quad chart? And the way you break it down into a quad chart is quite simple. You've got the personal competence side of how self-aware am I? How well do I understand myself? And then the next part is, well, based on my understanding of me, how well I understand myself, how well can I manage myself, my expressions, my emotions, my reactions? And then you have the social competence side. And that's how socially aware are you? How well do you understand other people? And then based on how well you know yourself, how well you manage yourself, and then how well you understand other people, how do you actually manage those relationships? And the key piece is, there's a quote there that from Viktor Frankl from his book, A Man's Search for Meaning. And it talks about between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies growth and freedom. So emotional intelligence, when you think about it and you're able to take a step back, emotional intelligence is our ability to give ourselves time and space. So that way we're not reactive. We're actually responsive to our environment, to the stimulus that's there. And there's a really good book. Now there's a whole lot of neuroscience in it, so you got to be okay with that. But it's written by Dr. Kerry Evans, who's the mental performance coach of the New Zealand All Blacks. And it's about performing under pressure. And he talks about the 3 things that you have to do to be able to perform under pressure. And you have to be able to step back, you have to step up, and then step in. And the key piece to emotional intelligence is the ability to step back and step up and think about, okay, what's actually happening? What does it mean? And what do I need to do about it? So all of us have heard about the OODA loop. And that's a part of the emotional intelligence piece. You know, what do I am actually observing about myself? What am I observing about other people? What does it mean? How do I make sense of it? And then what do I do about it? And when I think about a really good example of emotional intelligence and where it came from, really, for me, it was a coaching engagement with a client who didn't have very high self-regard. And so they didn't really think highly of themselves for a variety of reasons. And as a result, that impacted their ability to have really authentic and really deep interpersonal relationships. So when somebody crossed them, it was literally, you know what, you're dead to me. And that impacted their decision-making, and it impacted their ability to manage stress. So you could actually see all around the circle, everything was involved. So it really had to spend time in that self-awareness piece and get after the self-management piece. And once we had that figured out, we're able to actually touch on the relationships and move in a positive direction. And they were a general manager. They were a general manager in the manufacturing industry. So they had to rely on other people. They had to rely on teams. And once we were able to really harness their emotional intelligence in terms of their self-awareness and their self-management, it was amazing the impact that they had on their entire organization. So with that, what I'd like to do is switch gears, but it's not really switching gears because when we think about the DISC model of human behavior, it's about how we interact with other people, how we communicate with other people, and how we process information. And it's another quad chart for people that like quad charts. And when you think about DISC and you think about how it's set up, you have task orientation on the left side. You have people orientation on the right side. And then you have active engagement on the top. And you have reserved or passive engagement on the bottom. The key piece to understand is everyone has a unique blend of these 4 traits. So everybody has a little bit of each. And similar to the studies from the Center for Creative Leadership, the DISC research suggests that people skills account for 80% of leadership success in our personal and our professional lives. But when you start thinking about personality styles, well, there's only a 40% chance of a natural fit. So what does that mean? Most people have challenges when relating to and working with other people. So when you combine the DISC model of human behavior with emotional intelligence, it's about understanding yourself, understanding what matters to you and how you process information in order to impact other people. And there's a couple of percentages there in terms of what's the percentage of the really determined leadership style or personality style, that the folks that are outgoing and super task oriented. I wonder if that sounds like anybody that's on this call, right? Or what about the outgoing folks that are people oriented? Or the folks that are reserved, but they're task oriented? And then the reserved and people oriented. So when you think about the D style of the DISC model, it's about results and success. The I style, the influential style, is about fun and enthusiasm. The C style, it's about excellence. Sometimes it's even talked about perfection and value. And then the S being teamwork and harmony. So the last thing I'll talk about, to the right, you see the DISC model. And this is from an actual client of Dave's. And this is where this team fell out. A whole bunch of go-getters, right? You got the D style, task-oriented, outgoing. You've got the S style, whole bunch of teamwork getting done. And you can see that the S group is very close to the C line. So they have C-like tendencies in terms of perfection and making sure that all of the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. But not a whole lot. Fun crowd. Not a whole lot of folks that are outgoing and people oriented. And Dave, I'm going to let everybody know what this group was and why it mattered that it actually looked that way.
Yeah, so this client happened to be a capital management firm. And so if you think about the people that you want on a team for investing, it's obviously the go-getters, the ones that are getting the results, that are getting the return on investment. And then obviously you want the excellence. You don't want mistakes. You don't want the, oops, I invested in the wrong stock and you've lost half your investment. So when you look at this, and that was part of the question the client had, do I have the right fit of people in our organization? And the answer was yes. And some people would say, well, what about the I's and what about the C's? Because as the primary strongest trait, you had very few people in the organization that had those traits. But if you look at what the role was of those two people on the I trait, which was their primary trait, they were the salesmen. They were the two guys who went out every day, built relationships, built more clients, and then turned them over to the rest of the folks in the company. And those two folks on the C trait, that was their highest trait, those were the folks that worked in the accounting. Those are the ones that did all of their bookkeeping to make sure, again, like Dennis said, like the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. And so this is a really powerful tool because it can really help an organization as you plot out all of the people within the organization. It can really help the leadership get kind of a bird's eye view of what does my organization look like around that whole structure and setup of the DISC model with regard to the outgoing and reserved and the task-oriented versus people-oriented.
And why did we want to talk about emotional intelligence? Why did we want to talk about the DISC model of human behavior right now? Well, one, it's because resilience is a word that gets thrown around a lot right now. I think the only other word that gets thrown around more is emotional intelligence. But when you think about EQ and resilience, it's our ability to adapt to changing environments. And when you think about all of our current reality, I think we're all adapting to changing environments. So spending the time in that EQ space and really understanding yourself and what's impacting you is important. And being able to take a step back and understand your reality, understand how it's impacting you and how you can manage that. So that way you could positively step in and impact other people in a positive and productive way is all about emotional intelligence. And now I'm going to let Dave talk about the project that we're looking at and how these two subjects relate to it.
Yeah, and Dennis, before we do that, just real quick, you know, if we think about the whole COVID situation right now, when you start looking at people through the lens of that DISC model, and you start thinking about those people that are people oriented, and they're in lockdown, especially people that live by themselves. It could be elderly, it could be, you know, college age students, it could be whoever. And to think about the difficulty they're experiencing right now, and most of them don't even understand why. And that's the power, like Dennis said in the beginning, when you understand this stuff, it's a game changer because it really helps people understand why we do things. And that's the DISC model of human behavior. It's all behavior observable. And it's so powerful when you start looking through that lens, like Dennis said, in the professional or in the personal world. So it's really interesting, again, how Jason kicked off before, how we kind of connected through this Ringknocker session. And I just saw what Dennis did and went to the website for his organization. And I love, there was something on the website that talked about, you know, as a client, here's the kind of things that we're going to expect from our clients. And there's going to be a significant level of investment and effort that you're going to have to put in as a client. And it specifically says on the website. So if you don't feel like you're ready to do that, then it's probably best that we table that relationship. And that really just jumped out at me. And I just contacted Dennis and I said, hey, Dennis, let's set up a time to talk. And so we started talking and I started sharing a little bit about what we're doing as an organization. And again, Jason mentioned that pivot that we're doing now to help other nonprofit organizations as we go around the world. And we talk with organizations, and our focus is organizations that work with orphaned and at-risk children. We just started to see the huge need for training and leadership and organizational development. So Dennis and I have been talking and kind of strategizing on what it would look like. How would we build a train-the-trainer model where we can train people overseas in these nonprofits within specific regions to begin with, and eventually all the way down to the in-country level, and get people trained up on this so that they can in turn train their own folks. I did training in Africa a couple of years ago, and the training was highly successful. However, there were plenty of points where I had to stop and navigate through those cultural differences. Things like, you know, we talk about, you know, people working in silos. We know what that means. You know, everyone's kind of in their own little way, shape, and form doing their own thing. And when I used that, the room just stopped. And they were looking at me like I was, you know, all of a sudden no longer speaking English. And as I kind of navigated with them, I realized that they use the terminology garden, stay in your own garden. So those are the kind of things that really stand out or stood out to me, realizing, you know, it's a good thing if we can help people and train people. It's a much better thing if we can get trainers trained around the world so that they can invest in their own people in their own languages and their own cultures. So that's what Dennis and I have been kind of just throwing around a little bit we just continue to work through that. If there's folks on the call here who are passionate about that and want to, become part of that conversation, we'd love to bring you into that loop. Lots of smart people on the call, lots of passionate people. So it's exciting. It's really exciting. And thanks to Jason for doing this, because, this is a fantastic forum. And without this, Dennis and I would not be here on the call right now.
Well, you're obviously both very welcome. Listen, do you mind if I poke at that disc model? I've got a couple of questions.
You want me to bring it back up or just have a discussion about it?
Sure. Yeah. If you like, you can bring it back up. I just, I couldn't help but notice that the dots in that grid there, they had a shape that is probably quite characteristic to that organization. And it occurred to me to wonder, and you guys may have some idea about this because you've got experience with a number of different organizations, whether is there a sort of an ideal profile just for organizations in general, or do you find that organizations of different types tend to have certain characteristic profiles, or at least successful ones, and so that maybe there's sort of an ideal distribution of people for a financial services organization that may be different from that for a sales or an engineering organization? Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes sense. And based on my experience, it depends on the organization. It depends on the purpose of the organization, but it also depends independently of individual departments and everything else. So
they're more like fingerprints, is what you're saying. Like what I see in that chart, I shouldn't be trying to drive it to some particular shape, some ideal shape. More, I should be using it to get insight into what I've got.
Yeah, not only what you got, but when you start thinking about what do I got and what do they need, right? So when you start thinking about the D's, the determined folks, mm-hmm. the outgoing folks that are task-oriented, right? There's a whole lot of energy. So when you come to my desk, I don't really need all the chit-chat, Jason. I don't really care what you did over the weekend. I don't really care about what you're doing next weekend. I really want to know what the issue is. I want to know what you need.
Emotional intelligence.
and then move on. But guess what? If you try to do that with somebody who's an I, who needs that personal connection, who needs to know that you care about them, then you're going to impact that relationship.
That makes sense. And one more question, and I'll throw the floor open for everybody. So it seems like if I wanted to predict what an office party would feel like for a group of people, that little chart of yours would be a pretty helpful tool, right? I mean, do you find that different that the crowd represented by different distributions of dots on that thing feels like a very different crowd in characteristic ways?
Dave, I'm gonna let you get after that one.
Yeah, every organization is going to be different, and it all goes back down to, like Dennis was saying, what is the requirement, right? And how you fill that. So in that example of the one that we had on there with that capital management firm, I'm not sure that would be the party that I'd really want to attend, because they're probably not having a whole lot of fun, with the exception of the two I folks who are probably inviting all of their buddies just to go hang out in the corner and just have a whole great time. So it really is. It's very interesting, and it's very insightful when you're looking at building your team, and that's where this is so powerful. And as I've worked with clients and sat down with them and looked at their results, you can actually go through the results. And when you actually do an assessment, there's two different graphs that are produced. One shows the basic graph, which is basically how you're designed. And typically that doesn't change because it's how you're wired. The other one is the environmental graph, and that is a graph that basically will change over time depending upon what you're most relating to at the time. So for example, if I'm somebody who's highly outgoing, but for a job, I basically work in front of my computer in a little, office cubicle and just knock out spreadsheets all day, there's going to be some disjointness between the graph that shows how I'm designed versus what I'm relating to. And those are powerful when you work with people to say, okay, there's a huge disparity in the two graphs. So what's going on? And you can start literally identifying like what's going on with people, and it blows people's minds away when you start talking about their folks and saying, hey, you know what? They're typically a very outgoing person, but on their environmental graph, it shows that they're really, really low in their I trait, but it should be really high. So it sounds like there's some reason where they don't feel like they're having as much fun, that they're not having as much effect as kind of enthusiasm on the organization. And then every time you'll hear something like, wow, that's amazing, because yeah, we just moved that person to a job and they really are very unhappy right now. So it's so telling when you look at the full picture of the results, and then when you sit and work with people, it really helps them fill out their organization. And then when they're hiring folks, if you're looking to hire a counselor, right? Yeah, you want to get results there, but you don't want a high D that's very low on the other traits, because they're saying, look, just get over the problem, move on, right? And session's over, give me the money and you're dismissed. Let's get the next client. You need somebody that can walk in that journey. And for me, my lowest trait is the S trait. It's very, very small. And when I recognized that, I knew I needed to learn to be able to sit down and just be with people and just listen, because I am a high D and I want to jump right to the result. I want to solve the problem, but I had to learn. So I actually volunteered for a recovery group. And then for 2 years, I attended recovery meetings just to sit there and learn to listen. And that has made me now a better listener, to the point where people tell me, you're a really good listener. And inside I'm laughing, because I used to not be like that. So that's the power and what Dennis was talking about with both the emotional intelligence and the DISC model of human behavior.
Cool. All right. Well, listen, let me throw the floor open for questions from the other attendees. We got about 5-6 minutes for more questions. Has anybody got anything for the guys?
Hey, Jason.
Yes, sir.
So my question is that, when we're small business entrepreneurs, we're just slaying dragons every day. It never feels like we have time for this. So my question is, if we have a team of, say, 5 or 10 and our company's 30 to 40, do we do this with our leadership team, or is it best to deploy this sort of team and self-awareness at the company level?
So Bill, I've done it both ways. And, some of it is dependent upon time and cost, right? In terms of budgeting, because sometimes you can't take people off the floor to actually sit down and talk about this stuff. But if you sit down and talk about the stuff, you can do the stuff on the floor that much better. So it's the chicken or the egg.
Which do you choose, or which do you recommend from your experience, the chickens or the eggs?
For me, it's the self-awareness piece, not only of yourself, but of your organization, is crucial. To understand not only the strengths that you have, but also the blind spots that may exist that aren't allowing you to be as effective and as efficient as you can, regardless if you're a 5-person shop or a 5,000-person shop.
What I've found that is helpful sometimes with organizations is sometimes it's best to get the leadership first, because one of the things that does is it gets buy-in. And then they have a level of enthusiasm and they see how powerful this is. And then when they communicate it to their team, they communicate it in a way where it's not a requirement that we're going through this, but this is something that's going to transform. And it really, eventually, what it comes down to is really being an enabler of what you do, Bill. You know, when you help organizations, you know, list what are your individual core values, right? What is the organization's core values? How do they align? Because at the end of the day, it comes down to organizations operating and making decisions, every person in the organization, around those core values. And if we can learn to have better emotional intelligence and better understanding of others through the DISC model, then we have a better understanding of how to actually have conversations with other people while still maintaining that focus and center on the values.
Guys, what's the assessment procedure? Is it like a 10-minute quiz you take, or you have to spend 2 hours with an interview?
So it depends on if it's the EQ one or if it's the DISC one.
Okay.
And one of the things, there's at least, it's a quiz, it's an assessment, right? It's not a test, it's an assessment. And it doesn't take too long. I think one of the most powerful tools is there's actually a 360 model of the EQI, right? So not only do you take the self-assessment to say, this is where I'm at, but then you ask people within your organization, well, how self-aware am I? How well do I manage myself? How do I make good decisions? You know what? How's our and you know what? From a coaching perspective, that is the most telling piece of information about a leader, is getting that input and getting that information. So you really know, because that's the difference between intent and impact, right? What is the impact that they're really making on the organization versus what they think they're doing?
Do you often find some resistance to bad news there?
You know what? Honestly, I haven't. I haven't. But now the caveat that I have with that is most of the work that I do is with emerging leaders and developing talent and high potential programs. So the likelihood that they're not going to take that information on board is very small. Dave, over to you.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. Because, you know, if we're going to enter this relationship, then it has to be from the starting point of, I really want to learn and get better for myself and for my organization. And if leadership doesn't demonstrate that, and I'm sure those are the folks that Bill doesn't work with, right? Because look, if you're not here to really make a difference and then find, you know, good work-life balance in the process, then I can't help you, because there's a significant level of effort on your part. And if you're not willing to do that, then no matter what I say, it's not going to help.
Yeah, Dave, I would endorse that and say that when I engage with a new company, particularly focusing in on the founder CEO, one of the starting points is exactly where you're at. Now, I'm not a professional with DISC like you are, but I would use you because I think first we start with that self-awareness, which moves immediately to team awareness. Once we have both of those, now a lot of things can happen. But until we have those, we really have kind of a slow-moving ship. And so I would agree with you that this is probably the principal starting point for solid acceleration. It's the entry point.
Absolutely.
Bill, a question for you. I know that your guys use Colby and trying to think of what the strength builders, but strength finders. Do you think that is it more important that one choose, you know, a particular assessment model, or is it more important that one does the assessment at all, regardless of model?
I think some assessment is better than no assessment. But I think that there's just like I don't know naval warfare too good, but I'm sure you choose your weaponry based on who your enemy is. We choose our assessments based on what our desired outcomes are at that time. We may want to build over time, you know, a fabric of awareness, but we need to start someplace. What David and Dennis have presented is a fantastic tool for what's going on inside a person. The Kolbe is a cognitive assessment, which is focused in on action. If I land you on a battlefield, what do you do? And Kathy Kolbe she owns that market. And then the Strength Finder, Gallup Strength Finder, is more a developmental tool. It's indicating where we need to develop you and where we need to ignore it. The so-called strength weakness, you know, corporate America, it used to be, hey, this is where you're weak. We're going to work on this for the next 6 months. Well, then we have strong weaknesses because those are your inherent not strengths. They're not going to get better. So what Strength Finders is, it's more used for development, Kolbe for action, and the DISC model is how we bring our team together. I'm learning from Dennis and David, so please, guys, correct me. But my interpretation is this is where we're learning who we are and how we all fit together in the puzzle.
Yeah, and Jason and Bill, for me, from a coaching perspective, from a performance coaching perspective, I like to do the holistic development of folks because I look at human performance as potential minus obstacles.
There you go.
Identifying what the obstacles are. Yep. And so how does somebody think? And I use I use the NBI, which is a whole brain thinking assessment. And then how do they feel? So I use an EQ assessment. And then how do they behave? And I use Strength Finders. So that way, when you're trying to develop somebody and give them the awareness that they need, to know their potential, to understand the obstacles. And oh, by the way, some of those obstacles might be them. It might be internal, it might be external. But giving them the opportunity to really understand themselves in terms of how they think, how they feel, and how they act, I think is really important. Very similar from, you've got that at the individual level, taking that to the organizational level is important as well.
It's interesting to me just how technical coaching, I don't know if it's become this way or if it's always been this way, but it seems to, there's a lot more to it than just, you could do it. You know, it's highly quantized. Is this new, guys, or is this something that is it always been this way and I just never knew it?
Well, there's a huge difference between consulting and coaching. And that's part of the misnomer is people just lump them into the same thing and they're not. You know, consulting is where you're coming in and you're providing your expertise and your experience to help somebody else who may have not gone through that same experience before. And as a consultant, you may use coaching. Coaching is where, instead of you bringing the solution to the problem, through very intentional questionings, you're drawing the answer out of the client. And Dennis can talk much more about this. He's gotten certified in, like he said, a number of different areas. But that is just an important starting point to understand that when we're talking about coaching, it's literally about trying to tap into the power within somebody and draw the answer and the solution out of them. But there are times also where you need to step alongside them and say, hey, they've never been down the road and you're going to help them walk that path. And that's where consulting, and then you got mentoring as well on top of that too.